Introducing the Elgato Streamdeck. It can automate everything so you can become even lazier.
It's amazing.
It can control your lights, walk your dog, and even do your taxes.
I need to get me one of these.
Mouse users only.
Wait, what?
Did I stutter?
Wait. Kill the groove. You heard that right. Mouse users only is the name of the game here. And that is super unfortunate, but it's unfortunately the truth of the matter. This was supposed to be a very cheerful video. I started planning it last year in July when I picked some of these devices up because I was going to see if I could make them work for the visually impaired by using screen reader hacks and all sorts of other interesting things. I mean, the things I do on this channel. It's not a new thing. Yeah, that did not happen. It didn't take that short of a time. Elgato Streamdeck's application is amongst the most accessibility hostile piece of software I've ever used. And that is a fact. Let's go into why that is. Basically, the way these devices work is you get a bunch of buttons, which are essentially also screens, that you attach actions to. And it can be anything from turning on lights and turning off and on lights, starting applications, changing audio devices for applications, entering text, all sorts of things, really. It doesn't really matter. The sky is, in some respects, the limits, because you can just write a plugin for something that doesn't support it yet. And there you go, Bob's your uncle, you can now do what you want to do. The bit that is tricky and that's inaccessible is the drag and drop situation that this application requires. It's very much like the little dumb intro I made says. It's mouse users only. You cannot do anything with the keyboard. And I was literally just now unable to actually capture this window in my OBS as well. So I have tricked the viewer to be by just using a screenshot of the application window, which is fine because we're going to find out in just a second that I'm not going to be able to do much in it anyway. So the problem is that essentially this entire interface is keyboard inaccessible. You cannot tab around, you cannot click anything, you cannot press keys on anything. Let's actually just send my speech through so we can show off what happens. You won't be able to see the changes, but again, nothing will change. So we will we'll have some fun here, shall we? Okay, just to prove that the speech is running.
Speech mode deep, speech mode talk.
There it is.
Ops 32.1.0, profile,
There's
untitled,
my OBS.
Unpack Streamdeck, column 3 of Streamdeck window, default profile button.
There's the there's the Stream Deck window. It says default button, default profile button, and I shall press tab. I am pressing tab. Nothing whatsoever. Shift tab. Nope. Escape. Nope. Enter. No. Nothing in this interface works with the keyboard. In 2026, it's impressive. It is really impressive. This is among the worst accessibility fails I've seen in a very long time. Most things you can at least get some stuff done, and that is still true for this application. If you were to use object navigation, optical character recognition, you can get some things. You can get into the search field. You can look at some of the actions that you can play with. You can probably even get into the plugin store because that's just a web page, but that's literally about it. The main feature this app has that gives, its power is the idea of drag and dropping an action from the action list to one of the keys on this device. And there is various other tools. There is a mobile version of this. There is a couple of third-party vendors that do a very similar thing, where they all use the exact same thing, which is super intuitive if you can use a mouse. But there is not any alternative on any of these products that I have tested. I've played with Touch Portal, which was okay-ish. I've played with Streamdeck, obviously, I've played with, Bitfocus, and all of them have this issue. So I reached out to
Speech mode off.
Elgato about this, because obviously this is not something you'd think they want to persist within their application. I reached out to essentially Elgato support about this and got a relatively canned response back. So I essentially pushed further and said, listen, this is what the problem is. This is where I think it could be fixed. This is how it will be fixed. And eventually I got through to an engineering manager over at Elgato. Or who owns them now? Is it Corsair? I honestly don't remember. There's a whole thing where there's a number of these companies that sort of work together and sort of do their own thing. It's a whole thing. But basically, I got through to one of their engineering managers and went back and forth with him a few times. Essentially, he eventually promised me to do an investigation, see what they could do about this situation. And I think, again, I gave them the technical details and essentially performed a bunch of free labor for them, because I also checked another application for the Elgato Studio, which admittedly is a little bit better. And so is Elgato Wavelink, which uses a similar approach to Elgato Studio. Let me read you the last email I received from this individual. This was in October 2025. Hi, Florian. Thank you again for taking the time to write a thoughtful review of our product. Your feedback is truly appreciated. Since our last investigation, there haven't been any substantial updates, and unfortunately, we don't have a short-term solution to share at this point. Be aware, this is essentially after 3 months of already talking to this person. That said, accessibility remains a high priority for us. With all due respect, bullshit. With Elgato Studio, we're exploring a new direction in UI and UX design that includes improved accessibility features. Over time, we plan to bring similar enhancements to Streamdeck as well. Thank you again for your continued engagement and support. Yeah, I'm not as supportive anymore, friend, but let's continue and dive into the technical details here for a little bit. The Elgato Studio and Elgato Wavelink software uses something, at least on Windows uses, I think WinUI, MAUI, or a couple of other things that essentially render with native Windows controls. Native in the sense that they're native to Windows 10 and 11, not native as in Win32. Those are two very different things. And they do, like I said, work a little better in that regard. However, just implementing that same UI pattern on top of what Streamdeck is currently running would not fix this. The main issue is drag and drop, which has not been touched on by any of these other applications. So I feel like I've been sent off with a tap on the shoulder. Like I said, I did some free labor for them. I looked into a couple of other UIs for them. That's something I charge easily $50 an hour for normally. So yeah, he got free labor out of me, not proud of that. And then, yeah, nothing came of it. So I thought that's where, you know, things would run aground. I actually dropped the project for a little while and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it because, yeah, I didn't really see a solution immediately going forward, which is why this video took so long to come out. At some point, I got inspired to try a couple other things. I have thrown everything I could think of at this thing. I have tried to make an NVDA add-on. I have tried to work with auto hotkey and make drag and drop targets for the various buttons and actions, but nothing I tried worked. I even looked into making my own front end, talking to the internals of the device, because really what's happening under the hood is very simple. Every key has the ability to store essentially an actions ID, which is just a long string of digits and numbers to essentially indicate this is what you should do. And some of those actions have like extra things to it. For example, if you're opening an application, it needs to know what applications to open. All this could have been very easy to add as an alternative front end by the Elgato folks. They have the code, they have ways to essentially enumerate, essentially make a list of those actions that you have installed, and they could have just given you two lists, one with keys, one with IDs or actions. And that would have already made a huge difference. That still wouldn't make everything work because that entire UI is a mess, but it would at least make the biggest problem go away, the drag and drop issue. The rest you'd have to still figure out mouse-centric ways for, but that's doable with Golden Cursor or other things that essentially emulate a mouse. We were stuck with essentially up the creek with no paddle at this point. And because essentially all these actions sometimes need specific things like access to your operating system's list of sound devices or list of applications, I was not really getting anywhere making my own front end as well. Enter nicknames OpenDeck, which is essentially a third-party Streamdeck client that ideally is worked for that is essentially meant for Linux, but also works on Windows and other things. I did see this client when I first started this investigation, but I noticed that it had the same issue as the official client, so I dismissed it initially. Particularly because, and this is another annoying thing Elgato is doing, Elgato, for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why this is, has decided to start encrypting and putting DRM on the downloads of plugin code for the Stream Deck, which means that we now no longer see the code in those packages, so we can't modify them, and we can use them in open source projects like OpenDeck. I thought that was the end of this whole thing. But then a couple of months later, I noticed that there was actually an archive that this program OpenDeck contains that allows you to still get access to a majority of the current OpenDeck and StreamDeck plugins. Now, not everything works out of the box. I've noticed a few things that are not working. For example, wasn't able to talk to my hue lights yet, but I'm sure that's something that can be done because I have spoken to a podcast for the blind about this device, and that very thing was being done by one of the hosts. So I just need to figure it out. It's a bit more tinkery than the official client would be. But essentially what happened with OpenDeck is that I started adding code to it. I first spoke to the maintainer and explained what I was doing. And this person isn't like at home in accessibility. Obviously they aren't. A lot of people aren't, and that's a problem for another video. But this person was at least willing to let me do my thing. Like, he wasn't outright hostile. He was happy letting me sort of work on it and see if I could fix it. And eventually I did. So basically what I did was, this program leverages a system where you can copy an action from one key to another. That was already there. So essentially what I did was I made the key grid accessible for the keyboard and through screen readers. So you can use the arrow keys to go through the grid of keys and knobs on whatever device you have, Stream Deck Plus, Stream Deck Neo, whatever you have. And then I made the action list accessible. So you can tab and arrow through the list of actions that you have from various plugins you've installed. And then the last bit that we had to do was make sure that you could copy an empty action, so not from a key, but from the action list onto a key. And the maintainer helped a bit with that, and then I perpetuated it through the various other places where it was needed. Enter OpenDeck latest release. I put the link in the description, where you can essentially just copy-paste actions onto keys. It is really that simple. You don't need to do any fancy things. This was maybe 500 lines of code altogether, maybe 600. I knocked it out in a few hours, and it took a bit longer because the maintainer obviously is an open source maintainer, so they have a lot of things to do, and they have other stuff to merge in and develop themselves. So that took a little bit longer than it probably could have if I did it all myself. But now these changes are live in the main release that I don't maintain. That's another person doing that. But I was able and happy to be able to add these things to the OpenDeck interface. And yeah, that simple change, the fact that you can now navigate the grid with the keyboard, the action list with the keyboard, and you can copy paste with the keyboard, delete with the keyboard, and bring up the added interface for a key with the keyboard, allows us to essentially use these devices 100% like any OpenDeck user would. I'm saying OpenDeck user because, like I said, some plugins need a bit more tinkering to get working than the average Stream Deck user because, well, Elgato decided to make this even harder for us than it already was. I'm not intending to have this be a video on bashing Elgato. I feel they've made several big mistakes here. I think they coded themselves into a corner they couldn't really get out of. And I think that in some respects, that might influence if you want to spend money with these people. I want to be honest, but I also want to be fair. I don't think they were actively malicious in this sense. I don't think they decided one day to make an inaccessible application. I think like anybody else, like a lot of other people, they just don't know any better. But yeah, they have created a monster, and I hope, like they said, that they were going to redo the UI on this thing at some point, because it is positively horrendous and it needs to be fixed. So I went ahead and grabbed the OpenDeck software so we can give it a quick look. If we tab into here, we can see the various things. And let me tab onto the thing and show the speech.
Streamdeck plus table, use arrow keys to navigate between keys. Moving to a key will display its property inspector. Key A1, scene, camera 1, column 1.
So that switches to my camera scene in OBS.
Key A2, scene, double dot row 1, column 2.
That's another scene in OBS.
Key A3, remote recording start / stop / pause. Red circle row 1, column 3.
That's my pause. Essentially, that makes me have a button that pauses recording. I can just press that and it pauses instantly. I don't have to go find the button. I don't have to go find the button in the OBS window. I can be anywhere else on my computer and quickly hit the pause if I need to, which is really helpful. And then finally,
Key A4, play audio row 1, column 4.
that's a play audio key, and it does this.
Key A4, play audio -002. Key A4, play audio -001. Key A4, play audio -0 o'clock. Key A4, play audio.
And that's the sound we heard in the commercial. So yeah, essentially, if you want to change any of these, you tab into the what's known as the property inspector, which is essentially just the little window that comes up for every key, so you can change what the key does.
Button. Property inspector frame. Bar Raiders ops tools document. For feedback / combo box pause / resume collapsed. Combo box pause / resume collapsed.
That shows us essentially what the buttons do. Now, the one thing about the accessibility of this is that we cannot currently control what the third-party plugins UIs look like. So that's why some of these things are not labeled. Essentially, these combo boxes are for a short press and a long press. And you can find that out if you go into browse mode.
Long press.
Because this is just a web page, a web application. So that's helpful.
Combo for feed button. Document. Property inspector frame. Document. Combo box game. Roadcaster collapsed. Document. Streamdeck.
And that's how we deal with that. So I've just dismissed the property inspector for the pause button, and now we have the one for the play audio button that we just listened to, the It's Amazing thing. And I can tab, and it shows me that this is the audio device it's going to go through.
Combo box play / stop collapsed.
This is what it does. You can do play stop, but you can also do, for example,
play / overlap.
Play overlap, which makes it do this.
Loop / stop.
Or I can loop it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Stop.
Loop all / stop. Loop play / stop.
So yeah, much fun. And then if you tap one more time,
Combo box sequential collapsed.
you can set the list, because you can have multiple things to
Add
a
files
key,
button.
and you can add the files with this button. So basically, that's what you do with these buttons. You set them up once, you set them, forget them. They get stored to the device and to your computer. And then once this application is running and you have your keys to hand, you can just press them and they'll work and they'll do what they need to do.
Speech mode off.
Which is what we want. That's ultimately always what we have wanted. Copy paste onto a button is also very simple. Let's show that off real quick.
Speech mode talk. Document. Search action open deck button.
Let's search for an action. Let's do, what shall we do? Let's look for the word mute. Type for the word mute. The results get filtered as you type, so now you can just tab through these results.
Ops tools bar Raider list use arrow keys to navigate.
Here it says input mute toggle, so we can control C on that. It'll say no selection in my case because I have an add-on that tries to tell me what I copy, but really control C just picks it up, puts it on your clipboard.
Ops tool search at property inspector frame. Document.
Now we go back to our
combo document navigation landmark.
table,
Streamdeck plus table U0
which
key.
is right here. Let's find an empty key,
Key B402 column 4.
key B4, and we just paste.
Paste key B4. Input mute toggle.
And now there's an input mute toggle on there. And if you were to tab into this, you could set what that's supposed to toggle, and that's all, you know, a little bit outside the scope of this video. But this, what I just did, this is how simple it should have been in the Elgato Streamdeck application, and this is how simple it very much isn't currently.
Speech mode off.
So yeah, that's really all I had to say in this video. I'm going to continue making things more accessible. There's a whole lot of applications is on my list that I want to look at, including things like Obsidian, Anki, and various other tools that just refuse to get with the times and just become accessible already. There have been, you know, ways of doing this for decades, and they just refuse to do it. So with the advent of tools making this a lot faster and a lot easier to implement myself, that is essentially what I'm doing. As I'm currently laid off, I have a lot of time on my hands, so I try to do this for games, for applications, for programs, for web applications, and all sorts of other things in between. I have looked into various things, various devices. I'm going to be doing a video on the Rodecaster Pro soon, which is what I'm currently using to record this. Various other things are coming up as we go. Now, if you want to support me, that would be very helpful. You can do that by subscribing to this channel. That's already really helpful. Spreading the word, definitely also very helpful. And if you would like to help financially, the easiest way to do that is through my Patreon, which also will get you some interesting, cool perks. So that's patreon.com/Zersiax. I'll put that in the description as well. So if you want to help, you can do that way. Game-wise, we're doing a bunch of different games currently. Application-wise, there's a whole bunch of things on the docket. And I have no plans of slowing down anytime soon. So watch this space. For now, have a fantastic day. Have a fantastic night. Sorry for the goofs. And yeah, see you in the next video.
Stop recording button.
Goodbye.